Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the next attempted row within the Conservative Party as Boris Johnson and his allies spot an opportunity. They're seeking to capitalise on the fact that Sunak's poll ratings are now below those of the blonde buffoon at the point he resigned, and the party's polling is significantly lower, which just adds more fuel to the fire of Tory infighting, and all because Rishi Sunak has not even made progress on the one thing he was made leader to do. Those wanting Boris Johnson back are getting a bit bolder. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel. So in a YouGov poll this week, I've talked about this earlier this week, Rishi Sunak hit a threshold he would not have been looking forward to. He's now got a favourability rating of -49, the same as the Conservative Party. And although it is slightly above Johnson's lowest ebb, it is nonetheless below Johnson's rating at the point he was made to resign. And in an Express article, written heavily from the Boris Johnson perspective, points out that his poll rating was -46 when he resigned. They make no mention of the fact it dropped to -53 at one point. And Boris Johnson's allies in the media and the party are capitalising on it. There was nothing random about the fact Keir Starmer made mention of this in PMQs this week. It's something which divides the party, and it's going to divide it next year, and it's going to divide it for a few years to come, you would think. In fact, if Boris Johnson was still an MP, you would imagine that Sunak would be unable to avoid a leadership challenge. Right now, the only thing saving him is like, well, who we're going to get in charge? Who we're going to get that's better? There isn't anyone. Whereas quite a lot of Tory MPs think Boris Johnson would be. And Boris Johnson himself is stepping in now. According to a report in the Express, he has pointed out that the polling gap with Labour is now larger than when he was in charge. Now, the reality is that the gap was always going to widen as we went into 2023. The cost of living crisis, which Boris Johnson failed to head off, was always going to bite really hard this year. And even without a change of leader, Labour were going to extend their poll lead. It's hard to say it would be as much as a consistent 20-point gap, because it's likely that Liz Truss has caused permanent damage to the Conservatives' reputation. And as I keep saying, it was simply not feasible for the party to have kept Johnson as leader. That wasn't an option. His supporters now saying we shouldn't have got rid of him. There was no option to keep him. The damage it would have done to their party to have the Prime Minister suspended from Parliament, recalled from Parliament, would have been immense. It would have caused way more damage to them than getting rid of him for an idiot and then another idiot. But Johnson's allies conveniently forget about that. They conveniently block the reason why Johnson is not currently an MP from their memories. Because the reason he's not an MP is because he resigned. That was it, he resigned. No one forced him out. And instead they fall back on the narrative of him being brought down by a coup. Because that's the way it works. But perception is everything in politics. And the perception is that Rishi Sunak is not only not going to win the election, but hasn't even given them a sniff of a chance. The whole point in promoting Sunak was to get them back into contention. He's not done that. It's now clear he's never going to do that. And Boris Johnson finds himself in that enviable position as a populist gobshite of now being able to rewrite not only history but the future as well. He says that the Conservatives absolutely can win the next election. Oh, but you've got to do things a little bit differently. Easy to say when you're no longer able to decide these things. The fact of the matter is that a serious political strategist is not going to look at the Conservative Party and go, yeah, I could advise them how to win from here. I've never seen a polling gap like this, and for such a sustained period where the party behind goes on to win the next election. The only way the Conservatives win from here is with Labour imploding or some other mad, improbable event occurring. And neither of those things are within the Tories' influence. So it's not possible for a political strategist to advise the Tories on how to make it happen. But it suits Johnson to say it, and it suits MPs to think it. And the fact that Johnson did point out that the party polling is way worse than when he was in charge, that was done for a purpose. And what could that purpose be? Other than a green light to sort out some way of smuggling back into Downing Street. It's an implication that if he were brought back in charge, he would correct the situation. And at this point, I'm not sure whether Johnson is actively seeking a return to frontline politics or if he just wants to give the impression he is in order to have the pleasure of seeing Sunak brought down. It's a little bit like when Theresa May seemed to enjoy herself when Johnson was ousted. I think Johnson would enjoy a bit of revenge. If Sunak falls to the electorate, if he goes to the polls as leader, defeated, Sure, Boris Johnson can say, I told you so for the rest of his life, but that's not really revenge. Revenge would be seeing the same MPs who brought Johnson down, bringing Sunak down. Because Johnson doesn't just have it in for Sunak, but also the MPs that forced him out. He would like to see them eat humble pie. And according to the Express article right at the end, there are many Tory backbenchers who believe that only a Boris Johnson return can save them, and that there are plans to get their would-be saviour back into number 10. Now, that's what they say. It's not a direct quote, but that's what they say. There's no elaboration as to what the plan is. Now, this isn't the first time it's been mentioned, and it's hard to say what plan there can realistically be. Being clear, they're talking about getting Johnson back in charge before the election, not afterwards. So they're looking at a plan which needs action in fairly quickly. If they want Johnson in number 10 again, they first need him in the House of Commons, pronto. Now, given that he chickened out of defending his old seat in the by-election, they'd need a new by-election for him to stand in. Now, there are two almost certainly coming up. Blackpool South, Scott Benson's seat. That's got no chance of being retained by the Tories. Even the most blindly loyal Johnson supporter could not imagine that he would work enough magic to win that seat. Which would leave Wellingborough. This by-election will probably take place in February, so it's the quickest they can possibly get Johnson back into Parliament. I've said before, you know, there's a sense in which I'd be surprised if Sunak allows Johnson to stand as a candidate, when it's obvious that Johnson will be doing so in order to precipitate a move to replace Sunak. But let's say pressure can be brought to bear on Sunak not to block Johnson from standing. This is possible because such a move may just trigger his downfall anyway. And Sunak can probably be confident that Johnson wouldn't actually win the seat. So if you look at the Wellingborough election results from 2019, it looks really safe. It looks like, oh yeah, he'd have a real good crack at this. Johnson could stand there, win, be back on the green benches by the end of February, and then leadership challenge in March. But the 2019 result is deceptive. When Labour are in the ascendancy nationally, it has flipped to them in the past. It's also worth remembering that Johnson remains personally unpopular with the general public. Like any populist leader, he's got his strong support, but his public approval is amplified heavily. It would be interesting to see if letting Johnson stand for the by-election in Wellingborough would work well for Sunak or not. Because on the one hand, seeing Johnson lose a seat that was won with like 62% of the vote in 2019, that would knock this concept of Johnson being a serial election winner, wouldn't it? If he can't even win a single seat for himself that was won handsomely a few years ago, how on earth would people suppose he can win over 300 seats on behalf of others? So that would sound like a good outcome for Sunak. Sunak would go, oh yeah, let him stand, no problem. Yeah, I'm all for that. You know, he can then say Johnson's not the magical campaigner you thought he was when he loses. But as the campaign would still be run by CCHQ, there would be accusations, I suspect, of Sunak sabotaging the campaign to undermine Johnson, or the fact that Sunak was so poisonous as a Tory leader that actually no amount of magic could do it, but if only Johnson was the leader, it'd be fine. Again, the usual response when populists are defeated, blame treachery from within. And because Wellingborough is not really a safe Tory seat anymore, it may be that wiser Johnson advisers would warn against him standing in that by-election anyway. But then what would the plan be? Buy someone off in a safe seat? Get a Tory MP in a genuinely safe Tory seat to stand down in return for some alluring reward? They'd need to get a move on. And then imagine if Johnson still lost that. Remember that. When I talk about genuinely safe Tory seats, I mean for the election. When it comes to a by-election, especially if Boris Johnson's standing, there may be no such thing as a safe Tory seat. Maybe this is why the Express can't elaborate on possible plans to sneak Johnson back in. Maybe they don't have one. But that doesn't mean Sunak can breathe more easily. This comparison of polling between Sunak and Johnson was always going to happen. And if there's one thing about the Tories that's become abundantly clear in recent years, it's that when things don't go their way, they are very good at pinning the blame elsewhere. Even were there no other sources of friction within the Tory party, the fact that Boris Johnson was ousted will not be forgotten or forgiven by his allies, and they will use their grievance to undermine Sunak and his allies at every opportunity. They will continually characterise Johnson as the serial election winner who had his faults, but ultimately they dropped him, and now look what's happened. And they'll use it to stoke their divide and rule tactics within their own party for some time to come, I think. But But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, the join button for memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.